Hello everyone, this is Nathan. Today we're pulling Murlocs out of Hearthstone and into Magic the Gathering. If you're unfamiliar with Murlocs, these little fishy guys are from Azeroth, the main setting for World of Warcraft. In Hearthstone, they are notable for being able to flood the board. While weak by themselves, Murlocs have great tribal synergies and can overwhelm opponents when left unchecked. My first Magic deck was Soldier Tribal, with a white weenie strategy, so when I started playing Hearthstone, I immediately wanted to build a Murloc deck. Now, I'd like to bring Murlocs into Magic. Starting from the top, here is the deck I built. I looked at many deck variations, from making one exactly like my Hearthstone deck, to one that would essentially reskin an already existing Magic deck. When thinking of design, I considered other tribal decks like 5-color humans in Modern, and Merfolk in Legacy. However, I really wanted Murlocs to feel unique and not just be a ripoff of another tribe. But I also didn't want to make a bad meme deck that doesn't fit in with other Magic decks. So, my design of Murlocs is based on a few basic principles. First, I wanted it to have an aggro focus, using efficiently costed creatures that want to win by combat. I also wanted it to have flavorful evasion, with landwalk abilities that allow Murlocs to attack unhindered. This borrows from Hearthstone combat without completely breaking the game, and makes Murlocs feel unique. Lastly, I wanted a heavy tribal emphasis, with creature buffs, card advantage, and evasion all dependent on the Murloc subtype. With all that said, let's break down the Murloc deck, piece by piece. First off, we have Murloc Tidecaller, a 1/2 Murloc soldier for 1 white mana, at uncommon. Whenever another Murloc enters the battlefield, you put a +1/+1 counter on Murloc Tidecaller. While this is a strict upgrade of the Hearthstone version, I did not want to use +1/+0 counters, as Magic only has used these sparingly and not in many years. A good comparison would be Hada Freeblade, who has a very similar ability. Next up is Imprisoned Sungil, a 2/1 Murloc soldier for 1 white mana at rare. When it enters the battlefield, it phases out and can't phase in until the end of your next turn. Whenever it phases in, create 2 1/1 white Murloc creature tokens. This is essentially the same card as its Hearthstone counterpart. I really like this design, even if it is worded in an odd way. To create this card's mechanic, I looked at the wording on Teferi Timeless Voyager, a planeswalker with an ultimate that reads, each creature target opponent controls phases out until the end of your next turn they can't phase in. Moving on, we have Grimscale Oracle, a 1/1 Murloc for 1 blue mana at rare. It gives other Murloc creatures you control +1/+0 and Island Walk. Like the Hearthstone card, this pumps other Murlocs by +1 power, but with the added upside of Island Walk. This is comparable to Master of the Pearl Trident, and basically does half of what that card does. Now, our first 2-drop. Burlock, a 2/2 Murloc wizard for 1 white and 1 blue, at uncommon. When it enters the battlefield, you tap target permanent an opponent controls, and that permanent doesn't untap during its controller's next untap. This ETB trigger replaces Hearthstone's freeze effect. The ability to hit any permanent makes this very powerful, almost always slowing down your opponent. A good parallel is Merfolk Trickster, which has a similar tap ability. Next up is Rockpool Hunter, a 2/3 Murloc for a red and a green, at uncommon. When it enters the battlefield, you put a +1/+1 counter on another Murloc creature you control. Rockpool Hunter also has Mountain Walk. This card is the same as its Hearthstone equivalent, but with Mountain Walk added, because he likes rocks. It's similar to Jade Bearer, another Merfolk. Moving on, we have Underbelly Angler, a 2/3 Murloc for a green and a black at rare. Whenever another Murloc enters the battlefield, you draw a card and lose 1 life. There are some mechanics which are almost impossible to transfer to Magic, but the card advantage stays the same, while the life loss keeps this effect balanced. The best example I found is Wirewood Savage. This is not the best comparison, but I'm sticking by it. Now, our first 3-drop. Coldlight Seer, a 2/3 Murloc soldier for 1 generic, a white, and a black, at rare. It gives other Murlocs +0/+2 and Swamp Walk. A more accurate effect would have been giving other Murlocs a +0/+2 counter on the ETB, but again, that's not something you'd see on current Magic cards. A comparison is Chief of the Scale, which buffs warriors by +0/+1. Next up is Murloc Warleader, a 3/3 Murloc soldier for 1 generic, a red, and a white. At rare, it gives other Murlocs +2/+0 and Mountain Walk. This is the last of the Murloc lords, where Land Walk has been added. My example is King of the Pride, which gives other cats +2/+1. Moving on, we have Underlight Angling Rod, an equipment for 2 generic and 1 white, at Mythic Rare. When it enters the battlefield, attach it to target Murloc you control. The equipped creature gets +3/+2, and whenever it attacks, you look at the top card of your library. You may reveal it and put it into your hand if it is a Murloc. Weapons in Hearthstone are very different from Magic equipment, but I had to include this card, as it is one of my favorites. A similar equipment is Explorer Scope, where the ability instead of Murlocs grabs lands instead. So, our last Murloc is Primal Fin Lookout, a 3/2 Murloc Scout for 1 generic, a green, and a white, at uncommon. When it enters the battlefield, if you control another Murloc, look at the top 5 cards of your library. You may reveal a Murloc card from among them and put it into your hand. Put the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. Primal Fin Lookout also has Forest Walk. While not 1-to-1 mechanic-wise, the Hearthstone effect has very much the same flavor as this ETB trigger. This card is similar to Acclaimed Contender. Now for the mana base, the only custom land is Riverside Village, a rare land that enters the battlefield tapped unless you reveal a Murloc from your hand. It can tap for a colorless or for 1 mana of any color. That mana can only be spent on Murloc spells and abilities. This is essentially a reskin of Primal Beyond, which is the same card but for elementals. Otherwise, the mana base is 4 Cavern of Souls, 4 Unclaimed Territory, 2 Plains, 2 of each of the white draw lands, and 4 Aether Vials. To make this deck more casual or budget, I would cut the caverns, draw lands, and vials, replacing the lands with basics and tap lands, while the vials can be replaced by Murloc Tinyfin, a 1/1 Murloc for 0 mana at uncommon. This is basically a Murloc version of Memnite, but plays well with the deck's enter the battlefield triggers. Alright, with the deck composition broken down, let's see it in action. I'll be doing 3 games, each against a different 60 card deck that I have. Game 1, it's Murlocs versus Soldiers. Let's look at the starting hands. I have an Unclaimed Territory, an Imprisoned Sungill, an Underbelly Angler, a Sunbaked Canyon, a Riverside Village, a Grimscale Oracle, and a Murloc Warleader. Kaylee has 2 Soldier of the Pantheons, a Fairgrounds Warden, a Captain of the Watch, 2 Plains, and a Militia Bugler. Kaylee won the die roll, so she'll go first. On turn 1, she plays a Plains and Soldier of the Pantheon. I play Riverside Village, revealing Imprisoned Sungill, then play the Imprisoned Sungill, which phases out for 2 turns. Turn 2, Kaylee plays a Plains and another Soldier of the Pantheon. Then, Kytheon, Hero of Akros. On combat, she swings for 2, taking me down to 18. I play Unclaimed Territory, naming Murloc, and an Underbelly Angler. Kaylee gains 2 life from her 2 Soldier of the Pantheons, going to 22. On turn 3, Kaylee moves to combat and swings for 4. I can't block with my multicolored creature, so I go down to 14. My turn, Imprisoned Sungill phases in before untap, which creates 2 1/1 white Murloc tokens. I draw 2 and lose 2 because of the Underbelly Angler, going to 12. For land drop, I play Cavern of Souls, naming Murloc, then cast Murloc Warleader, making me draw 1 and lose 1, going to 11, while Kaylee gains 2 from the multicolored creature being cast, going to 24. Moving to combat, I swing for 8. Kaylee's unable to block due to Planeswalk, taking the damage going down to 16. Turn 4, Kaylee plays Precinct Captain, then moves to combat, swinging for 4 and taking me down to 7. I drop a Riverside Village, revealing a Murloc, and play a Grimscale Oracle, drawing 1 and losing 1, going to 6. I head to combat and swing for 18. Still unable to block, Kaylee goes down to 0. Game 2, Murlocs versus 8-whack Goblins. Looking at starting hands, I have a Cavern of Souls, a Cold Light Seer, 2 Rockpool Hunters in Unclaimed Territory, a Murloc Tiny Fin, and a Murloc Warleader. Kaylee has 2 Goblin Grenades, 2 Mountains, 2 Goblin Pile Drivers, and a Goblin Bushwhacker. Kaylee won the die roll again and goes first. On turn 1, she plays a Mountain and Goblin Bushwhacker. I drop Cavern of Souls, naming Murloc, then cast Murloc Tidecaller, and then a Murloc Tiny Fin for free. This triggers Murloc Tidecaller's ability, giving it a +1/+1 counter. Turn 2, Kaylee plays a Mountain and a Goblin Pile Driver. My turn, I play Unclaimed Territory, naming Murloc, then cast a Rockpool Hunter. Murloc Tidecaller gets a +1/+1 counter from its ability, while Rockpool Hunter puts a +1/+1 counter on Murloc Tiny Fin. Moving to combat, I swing for 3. Unable to profitably block, Kaylee goes down to 17. On turn 3, she plays a Mountain and another Goblin Pile Driver, then casts Goblin Grenade, sacrificing Goblin Bushwhacker, targeting Murloc Tidecaller, which resolves and kills it. I play Unclaimed Territory, naming Murloc, and cast Murloc Warleader. Moving to combat, I swing at Kaylee for 8. Unable to block the Rockpool Hunter and not wanting to lose a creature blocking the Tiny Fin, she goes down to 9. Turn 4, Kaylee plays Mog War Marshal, creating a 1/1 red Goblin token. Then she casts another Goblin Grenade, sacrificing Mog War Marshal, and targeting Murloc Warleader. Because of Mog War Marshal's death trigger, she creates a 1/1 red Goblin token, while my Murloc Warleader dies. Keeping back blockers, Kaylee ends her turn. I drop a Cavern of Souls, naming Murloc, then cast Cold Light Seer, and Imprisoned Sungill. During combat, I swing for 2, taking Kaylee down to 7. On turn 5, she plays a Mountain, then Legion Loyalist. Moving to combat, Kaylee swings her whole board for a total of 21 damage. The Loyalist gives all her creatures First Strike and Trample, so I only block the Legion Loyalist and one of the tokens, taking 19 and going to 1. My turn, I cast Rockpool Hunter, which puts a +1/+1 counter on the other Rockpool Hunter. Then going to combat, I swing for 7, which is exactly enough to take Kaylee down to 0. Game 3, it's Murlocs versus 12 Scissors. Let's see opening hands. I have 2 Ornithopters, a Skilled Animator, 2 Islands, a Stubborn Denial, and a Ghost Fireblade. Kaylee has 2 Rockpool Hunters, a Cavern of Souls, a Murloc Tiny Fin, a Murloc Tidecaller, and 2 Underbelly Anglers. Kaylee won the die roll for the 3rd time, so she goes first. On turn 1, she drops a Cavern of Souls, naming Murloc, then casts Murloc Tidecaller and follows it up with Murloc Tiny Fin, which gives Murloc Tidecaller a +1/+1 counter. I play an island, then cast my 2 Ornithopters for 0 mana, while holding up the Stubborn Denial. Turn 2, Kaylee goes to combat swinging for 2. This takes me down to 18. My turn, I drop Darksteel Citadel, then pay 1 to cast Ghostfire Blade, and pay another 1 to equip the blade to Ornithopter. Going to combat, I swing for 2 in the air, taking Kaylee down to 18. On turn 3, Kaylee moves straight to combat and swings for 2, taking me down to 16. My turn, I drop an island, then cast Tezzeret's Touch on Ornithopter. This makes it a 5/5 artifact creature with flying. On the combat step, I swing for 7 in the air, which takes Kaylee down to 11. Turn 4, Kaylee plays a Horizon Canopy and casts Murloc, taking 1 from Horizon Canopy. The ETB ability targets my 5/5 Ornithopter, which taps it down for 2 turns, while Murloc Tidecaller gets a +1/+1 counter. During combat, she swings for 4, taking me down to 12. I play a Darksteel Citadel and cast Skilled Animator, who targets the other Ornithopter, also making it a 5/5 creature. Heading to combat, I swing for 7 flying, and bring Kaylee to 3. On turn 5, she casts Underbelly Angler, taking 1 from Horizon Canopy, which lets Murloc Tidecaller get a +1/+1 counter. On combat, she swings for 4, taking me down to 8. My turn, I cast Insult Artifact on my Darksteel Citadel, making an indestructible 5/5 creature, then move to combat and swing my animated artifacts for 17 damage, which closes out the game. Wrapping up, I think the main takeaway is that I am good at playing the decks I've made. All jokes aside, the biggest issue with Murlocs is also its biggest strength. It is an all-in aggro deck, with the capability to go wide and tall very quickly, while the land walk abilities make the creatures serious threats. That said, the lack of interaction severely weakens this deck. Murlocs also don't have much protection against removal and board wipes. At best, I think this would be a fun Tier 3 modern deck. Not quite good enough to be competitive, but certainly a kitchen table pub stomper. Perhaps I will try and fine-tune Murlocs so that they could be better. In the meantime, I hope you enjoyed the video. Good night and good luck.